Did you know that more than 70% of countries around the world have eradicated capital punishment? Unfortunately, to our dismay, the United States is not one of those countries. Hi, my name is Kenzie Curtis, and today I will be offering critical information which will provide insight on the reasonings why our nation should put an end to the death penalty in its various forms. Much material has been addressed by advocates for its abolishment, which will be referenced to provide enlightenment on the topic of capital punishment, problems generated by such practice, and a proven catch-all solution to cease of using the death penalty in our society backed up by evidence. To begin, capital punishment is the process of sentencing convicted offenders to death. There are various methods of execution used with the death penalty, to include lethal injection, which is a combination of chemicals used to cause muscle paralysis, respiratory arrest, to stop the heart, and for sedation. There's also electrocution, where a person is securely strapped to a wooden chair and electrocuted with high voltage electrodes affixed to the subject's head and legs. Lesser known methods used by early settlers from Britain brought forth different variations of practice with them is death by firing squad, lethal gas exposure, hanging, and beheading. The first known execution was in Virginia in 1608 in the United States. Over the years, much legislature has evaluated the death penalty, and practices have changed in their forms. Iconically, Michigan was the first state to abolish it altogether in 1846, and more states have followed suit since then. As most of my listeners are from Wisconsin, it's enlightening to note that the state has never utilized capital punishment. If only the whole nation could follow suit in that standpoint. As we look at current status, as of January 2023, the death penalty is legal in 27 states. In 3 of those states, there's a temporary legislative halt in place, as seen in gray. The blue represents legal capital punishment states, and the green is where it is illegal. Now that you know what the death penalty is and a bit of its history, there is much reasoning to know as to why the death penalty is problematic. For instance, hundreds of people have been exonerated prior to execution, meaning they were found innocent after their initial sentence. A recent example of this is Jesse Johnson, a former Oregon death row prisoner who was freed after a reverse conviction of the 1998 murder of Harriet Thompson. Jesse maintained his innocence up until his 2021 release. After too many years in prison, the court finally concluded that there was no DNA evidence that bound Jesse to committing such an offense. They also acknowledged that the defense did not interview key witnesses during the trial and that police failed to explore other suspects during the investigation, which made Jesse the 194th death row individual absolved of their wrongdoing since 1973. But not everybody is so lucky, and many of the innocent have been held to a darker fate. Furthermore, the death penalty is disproportionately used. Many individuals with mental illness, who are poverty-stricken, and those of minorities or other discriminated groups are more susceptible to punishment. They often cannot afford to fight for their innocence and were often unheard due to biases in their trial. Jesse Johnson, as noted in my example, was an African-American male. A little statistic for you is that of the 194 individuals exonerated, 105 or 54% were Black, which cannot be a coincidence. This brings up the following issue that capital punishment is unconstitutional. Everyone has the right to life. The 14th Amendment reads, "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of law." In many high-end crime cases, mention of the death penalty is used as a threat for plea deals, breaching standards of ethics for the Constitution. Importantly to note that juveniles' brains who aren't fully developed are also at risk of being executed, Some states have not even set a minimum on the age, yet others note as young as 16 are equally permitted. The Prison Policy Initiative chart shows that 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, and even as young as 14 in Utah can be executed under the death penalty who have not fully come to maturity. Moving forward, the Eighth Amendment is also one of the biggest problems. Its focus, as we know, is cruel and unusual punishment. The Death Penalty Information Center notes that death row prisoners in America generally spend over a decade awaiting execution or court rulings appealing their death sentences. More than half of these prisoners have been on death row for more than 18 years, often in solitary confinement for 23 out of 24 hours of the day. This can cause an individual to develop mental illness of awaiting fate and uncertainty of their future, to include delusions and suicidal ideations in some cases, causing complete insanity of an individual. This violates the text of the amendment, as capital punishment can be significantly harsher than punishments traditionally given for the same similar crimes. The last problem I will be addressing is that capital punishment is not helpful in deterrence of crime because it takes more of a retaliation route of justice, an eye for an eye, if you will. In an article by the Florida Times Union, the author Bishop Felipe Estevez provided a valuable note on how the death penalty diminishes the view of everyone if we teach that killing is wrong by killing someone in turn. Luckily, a certain alternative solution to the death penalty exists, which is life without parole. Life without parole is a prison sentence given to a convicted defendant in which they are required to remain in prison for the entirety of the remainder of their life, without the ability of a conditional release. There's evidence surrounding this alternative solution to the death penalty being feasible, one being that life without parole would be cost effective, which in many states have looked into. A 2016 study by Lewis and Clark Law School and Seattle University found that 61 death sentences handed down in Oregon cost taxpayers an average of $2.3 million, including incarceration costs, while 313 aggravated murder cases cost an average of $1.4 million. The study, which examined the cost of hundreds of murder and aggravated murder cases in Oregon, concluded that maintaining the death penalty incurs a significant financial burden on Oregon taxpayers. The research found that the average trial and incarceration costs of an Oregon murder case that resulted in the death sentence are almost double those in a murder case that resulted in the sentence of life imprisonment or a term of years. Imagine the money that is collected in taxes that could be delegated elsewhere if implementations of the death penalty ceased. Life without parole also provides the incarcerated with certainty of punishment. As we previously established, there is a large risk of prisoners developing further mental health crises, which will cost more money while on death row because they are anticipating their future. By using this alternative sentence that is eliminating and doesn't waste the court and its involved personnel's time in appealing deadlines before execution because the decision is in stone. Change in societal views is also proof that of the beneficiality of life without parole instead of capital punishment. Jeffrey M. Jones, PhD, a Gallup senior editor, reported in a November 25, 2019 article, Americans Now Support Life in Prison Over Death Penalty, that for the first time in 34 years, a majority of Americans say that life imprisonment with no possibility of parole is a better punishment for murder than the death penalty is. The article also notes that 60% of individuals are now in favor of incarcerating people for life, opposing the previous 36%. This shows more and more of the population is declining to back executing because they are realizing capital punishment's downfalls. In conclusion, now that we have addressed the totality of the death penalty issue through its history and problems generated by it, you are now aware of the past leading up to the current trajectory of the death penalty and why everyone should be in agreement that capital punishment needs to be abolished in the United States provided the substitute solution of life without parole. Once the United States succeeds in making the death penalty obsolete, I believe that other countries will respond around the world and follow suit to completely rid society of the death penalty, which I think you can agree with.